Welcome to Pasadena Monthly, formerly known as NewsWrap Local. I'm your host, Justin Chapman. Thanks for being here, and happy Women's History Month. After taking a look at what's been going on in Pasadena this past month, we'll speak with our guest, Kristen Muller, Chief Content Officer for Southern California Public Radio. But before we get started, let's check out these Pasadena media news briefs.
Philanthropist and former Pasadena City College Foundation board member Bill Galloway passed away on March 1st, 2023. Pasadena was Bill's home since 1955, where he studied drafting, architecture, and construction at Pasadena City College, later becoming involved in real estate and settling down with his wife, Brenda. In 2000, Bill and Brenda endowed a sculpture garden to PCC, named Galloway Plaza, the college's first facility named for an African American. In addition to philanthropy and support of education and the arts, Bill is known for his community involvement, serving on the boards of many organizations.
On March 11th and 12th, the Pasadena Fire Department held their first ever Girls Fire Camp at the Pasadena Fire Training Center. The camp teaches skills needed for a career in the fire department and was hosted by an all-female firefighter team. In addition to participating in educational training and team-building exercises, the teenage students became firefighters for the day, wearing fire department protective gear and becoming familiar with the equipment necessary to perform firefighting duties, including appropriate ladder management and working together to change a hose line. The Pasadena Girls Fire Camp was created to inspire young girls to accomplish anything.
Barrier enhancements for the Colorado Street Bridge have been in the concept stage now for decades. In 2018, the Pasadena City Council unanimously approved recommendations from the Colorado Street Bridge Task Force and initiated the development of a permanent suicide prevention barrier system. On Wednesday, February 22nd, the city of Pasadena is hosting a meeting at La Casita del Arroyo to share updates about the project with the community. By the end of 2023, city staff expects to present updated design concepts for review and return the project to the City Council's Public Safety Committee for further recommendations.
Let's turn next to our lightning round of news updates. 1. The Pasadena City Council appointed 16 residents to the 710 Stub Working Group, which will advise the council on the redevelopment of the 50-acre property, which Caltrans relinquished to the city last summer over several years. Mayor Gordo appointed Cynthia Kurtz and Wayne Brandt, and the council members appointed, in district numerical order, Tina Williams, Neville Green, Danny Parker, Brian Takita, Blair Miller, Ali Barar, and Randy Schulman. The group will also take into account the thousands of residents and businesses, mostly African Americans, Asian Americans, and Latinos, who were displaced when the state built the freeway interchange in the 1960s and 70s. To that end, the council also appointed 7 at-large members, 2 of whom were themselves displaced by the freeway or are descendants of displaced residents: Jose Luis Cordia, Joel Bryant, Mick Hansen, Remy De La Peza, Jasmine Schuper, Michelle Richardson Bailey, and Adriana Lim. The group's first meeting is expected to take place in mid-April. They certainly have their work cut out for them. Next steps include hiring a consultant, creating a financing plan, and soliciting public input. 2, the council also established a charter reform task force that will study multiple potential amendments to the city charter. This new panel is expected to consider alternatives to the city's process for filling vacancies on the council, other election-related issues, the role and appointment of the vice mayor, term limits, and other reforms. City staff is preparing a request for proposals for a consultant to guide the charter review process, coordinate outreach, and help produce the final report with a budget of $175,000. The city will soon begin accepting applications for the task force. RFP responses will be due at the end of April. The council will appoint members to the task force in May, and it will begin meeting in June for 1 year before coming back in June 2024 with recommendations for reforms. The council will then decide which charter amendment measures to put on the November 2024 election ballot. The city's charter was originally adopted in 1901 and has been amended 54 times. It has been nearly 25 years since the last comprehensive charter study. 3, the council also amended the Housing Department's fiscal year 2023 operating budget by adding $100,000 for weather-activated motel vouchers to unhoused people. The program is operated by Friends Indeed. The city is still trying to secure a location for a bad weather shelter, which it has gone without since the start of the pandemic. Once secured, the shelter won't be open until next winter. 4, the council also ended its local COVID emergency, which had been in effect since March 2020. Pasadena Health Officer Eric Candler rescinded certain health orders related to COVID isolation, quarantine, and masking in public settings. Acting Public Health Director Manuel Carmona said COVID activity and hospitalization rates in Pasadena have remained low since early December. That said, you still need to stay up to date on your vaccinations and boosters and take sensible precautions. If you interact regularly with someone who's at high risk for getting sick from COVID, such as people who are elderly, immunocompromised, or have underlying health conditions, consider continuing to wear a mask indoors. And don't forget about long COVID. No one wants that. A new COVID-19 strain, XBB.1.5, has emerged as one of the dominant variants in LA County and has been observed in Pasadena, though it doesn't seem to cause severe illness. 5, former Pasadena resident Sirhan Sirhan, who has been in prison since assassinating Senator Bobby Kennedy in June 1968 at the Ambassador Hotel in LA, was denied parole yet again. In 2021, a different parole board voted to release Sirhan, but California Governor Gavin Newsom overruled them in 2022. Sirhan's attorney, Angela Berry, told me at that time that had he been released, Sirhan planned to live in Pasadena again. Sirhan was a Pasadena City College student at the time of the assassination, and he had also attended Elliott Junior High and Muir High School. Sirhan, who is 78, will be eligible for another parole hearing, his 18th in 3 years. When he was shot, Kennedy had just won the Democratic presidential primary in California and probably would have gone on to win the nomination and the presidency. So it was literally a history-changing event. 6, Lakers co-owner and Playhouse Village Foundation board member Johnny Buss has purchased and reopened the legendary Ice House, dubbed the oldest comedy club in the country at 63. Buss renovated the 2 stages, VIP lounge, green room, bar, patio, and lobby, but kept the same intimate feel and aesthetic, and he plans on bringing live music back to the club soon. 7, yesterday was the deadline for applicants to submit completed rental housing board applications. As of yesterday afternoon, just before the deadline, 18 people have qualified for consideration for 11 seats and 2 alternates. Council members are now reviewing the applications. Meanwhile, the next court hearing in the California Apartment Association's lawsuit against Measure H is scheduled for this Tuesday, March 28th. At the April 17th council meeting, council members will appoint 7 tenant members, 4 at-large members, 1 tenant alternate, and 1 at-large alternate, with a potential special meeting tentatively scheduled for April 20th. The charter-imposed deadline for appointments to the board is April 21st, and the first meeting of the Rental Housing Board will take place on or before May 17th. 8, the city and the county have agreed to move forward on a partnership to expand much-needed mental health services in the community. Staff will begin exploring properties in the city of Pasadena for co-location of health outpatient services and housing. Meanwhile, the Pasadena Outreach Response Team, known as PORT, is receiving $900,000 from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, a division of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, via congressional spending allocated by Pasadena Congressmember Judy Chu. 9, beginning April 28th, gas-powered leaf blowers will be banned in the city of Pasadena. The city is conducting an outreach campaign about the new rule, and code compliance will issue 30-day warning notices and then citations for continued violations, which could result in fines between $116 and $1,000. In addition to noise, gas leaf blowers emit more air pollutants than pickup trucks. A California law banning gas leaf blowers statewide will go into effect at the beginning of 2024. Vouchers and discounts on electric leaf blowers are available at californiacorps.org and aqmd.gov. And 10, the California Department of Housing and Community Development has certified the city's housing element, which must be updated every 8 years and allows the city to prepare a community-specific approach to how and where housing will be addressed to meet the needs of the community by analyzing existing housing conditions, describing existing and future housing needs, and identifying opportunities to improve and expand the city's housing supply. Let's patch in our guest, Southern California Public Radio's Chief Content Officer, Kristen Muller. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Kristen oversees the programming, podcasting, and local journalism of the radio station formerly known as KPCC and now known as LAist 89.3. She leads an award-winning team of hosts, reporters, producers, and editors. She has spent more than 20 years in a newsroom. Her career launched at CBS News, where she started as a researcher and worked her way up to producer of the CBS Evening News. She also spent 2 years as an associate producer at 60 Minutes, where she won an Emmy Award. She joined SCPR in 2010 to launch the Madeline Brand Show, and eventually became managing editor of the newsroom as it expanded its journalistic capacity, transforming from a radio station to a multi-platform civic news institution. And she took on the role of chief content officer in 2017. So, Kristen, can you start by giving us a brief history of the radio station? It's kind of gone through a few different iterations, right?
Sure, several different iterations. And I should say that within public media, we're actually considered young because Southern California Public Radio was formed in 2000. At the time, we were operating off the campus of Pasadena City College in a very small space. I think Larry Mantle used to joke that the staff could fit into the broom closet. That's how small of an organization we are. And I would say from the very beginning, there was a strong focus on local news and all news programming. So whether it was content coming from Morning Edition or All Things Considered or Air Talk, and then later we had shows with Pat Morrison, Madeline Brand, we've always really invested heavily in the community local news. So that has evolved though over the years. I mean, from focusing on local news mostly on the radio to focusing on local news on podcasts, on the website, LAist.com. And I should mention that I think a big point in our evolution was 2018 when we acquired LAist.com, the website from, it was up for sale. And we really took that as an opportunity to expand our digital footprint. So we were for a while operating both as KPCC and LAist. Recently, we've gone under one name, which is just LAist.
Yeah, and that rebranding. Tell us about why the name was changed and the intention behind this larger rebranding effort.
Sure. So if you are familiar with public radio, you may also be familiar with all the different acronyms like NPR, BBC, American Public Media Group, otherwise known as APMG, PRX, PRI, KPCC, KCRW. There are a lot of different, I think there's a lot of confusion among listeners as to who is who and what is what. And I think to the public, we're all just, we're public radio. It doesn't matter how you kind of divide it all up. So we saw that as kind of a pain point to solve for, because there was a lot of confusion about like, what is KPCC versus what is NPR? What about KCRW? So we've always kind of wrestled with that confusion. I think when we purchased LAist in 2018, it resonated for a couple of reasons. One, it spoke to our sense of place. We are so invested in Southern California and coverage of Southern California that it seemed to be more kind of inclusive than KPCC, which is really the call letters for Pasadena City College. And then secondly, we're shifting, and we have been in the middle of this shift for some time, from a public radio station to truly a multi-platform news operation. So call letters are often associated with a radio station. LAist is, I think, a bigger, broader idea that can go across podcasts. Like we have LAist podcast studios, the website LAist, the radio station LAist. So it was, I think, it worked for us on a couple of levels, and we just decided to pull the plug this year. It's something we've been talking about for several years, actually.
And have there been other changes as well, or just really the name and the branding?
It's pretty much the branding. I will say we all have new LAist t-shirts. We've had to retire our KPCC clothes. But other than that, yeah, I mean, we haven't changed any of our reporting. Our coverage is still the same. We have still the same focus. I would also note that even though we're called LAist, we still have a strong presence in Orange County. One of our hosts is based from there and reports from there, as well as reporters. So it's pretty much the same. I mean, I think what you may hear or notice is that I think we're a lot more explicit in what our role is in the community. We really see an opportunity to help Southern Californians kind of navigate this complex region and maybe connect with others, find ways to affect positive change. And discover the city, so we're I think going to be messaging a lot more about how we're focused on the community and how we work with community members to produce the coverage. So but again, that's part of the larger overall branding. So.
Mhm. And I think I read the call letters KPCC still have to be broadcast once an hour, right?
That's right. Yes, there are some, I'd have to double check this. I believe there's some FCC regulations that require us to do that.
Right. And I think I also read that the market research that the station did found that people were more aware of the name LAist than KPCC. Is that right?
Yeah, it did. It was surprising to us, actually.
Mhm.
The thing about public radio is if you know it, you love it. But many people have never heard of it. And certainly a lot of people hadn't heard of KPCC. I think LAist resonated more because people think of LA and being an ist is like you're of something. So of LA seemed to have more recognition than KPCC. So again, it was another, for us, kind of a surprise in the research, but also kind of, I think it also reinforced our desire to go forward with the rebranding.
And how have people been responding to this change?
I think on the whole, positively. I think there was initially some kind of skepticism about whether it meant our coverage was changing, our programming was changing. And that was the chief concern, not the name, but more, did the name symbolize a withdrawal from other parts of Southern California? And once we assured people we were not, and obviously we've been doing actually a lot of reporting out of other counties in the last couple of months because of all the storms. The storm doesn't hit just one county. So we've been able to kind of reinforce that we're not changing that. Some people have said that LAist is hard to say, and it certainly doesn't roll off the tongue, but it's not, once you say it enough, you kind of get used to it. Occasionally you'll still hear a host slip up and say KP, and then they'll stop themselves. But no, I mean, for the most part, once we explained it to our members and our listeners, there wasn't a lot of pushback. It was, just make sure the programming doesn't change. And so, yeah, it's been really positive.
Yeah. And I mean, that name LAist was sort of an offshoot of other cities that had a similar news website, DCist and Gothamist, I think might have been the first one. And as you mentioned, the station acquired LAist.com in 2018, which had been abruptly shut down by a previous owner. Tell us a little bit about that situation. Why was it shut down, and why then KPCC at the time decided to acquire it?
Yes, there was, the man who owned it owned several sites. It was, as you mentioned, Gothamist, DCist. I think there was also an FSist for San Francisco, LAist. And it was a network, they run, it was not a nonprofit. It was a commercial operation that relied on digital advertising. And, it was, I don't know that the owner ever went on record as to saying the exact reasons as to why he put it up for sale. But it did coincide with a union drive, which was taking place at several shops. Anyway, regardless the reason, he decided to sell it. And a group of public radio stations led by WNYC approached him and said, hey, you've got all this great archive material. You still have, you have brand equity in all these ists, and there are a lot of social media followers. What do you think about public radio taking them over? And he was amenable, clearly believed in the power of the local reporting. And so the Washington station, the New York station, and KPCC at the time all joined forces, and we kind of hammered out a deal. And each station approached their purchase differently. So for instance, the New York version, it was called Gothamist, and they essentially rehired the entire Gothamist staff that had been working for the site before it had shuttered. We did not hire any new staff. We had coincidentally had some former LAist staffers on our staff, so they kind of helped us with the transition. But we mostly just diverted all of our digital reporting resources over to the LAist site away from kpcc.org. And then the Washington station did kind of a hybrid approach. They hired a couple of people back from the previous website and then tried to merge it a little bit more with their newsroom. So I would say that out of all three stations, we kind of threw our arms around LAist in the most kind of complete, probably fastest way.
Mhm. And the station itself continues to be based in Pasadena, of course, and SCPR recently purchased the neighboring building and turned it into the podcast studio. And then as we've been talking about the LAist.com site a few years ago. So are there other plans to expand, or have you found that balance that enables you to cover Southern California in the way that you want?
We don't have any plans to physically expand. We're still, like many workplaces, operating in a hybrid mode. So on a day like today, actually, it's quite full. There are several teams here. We have a pledge drive going. It's almost like 2019. But if you come on another day of the week, you might only find 30 people here. So we have more than enough space to accommodate our staff. In terms of expansion, I think we see real opportunities to forge more partnerships with other local news providers in the region, community, ethnic and in-language media partnerships are important to us. So that's, if we start showing up in more places, it's going to be a combination of that effort, which is well underway, along with our effort to be on more platforms at different times of day. So not just LAist.com updating throughout the day and the weekends, but also, podcasts daily, weekly, a more robust social media presence, newsletters. So that's more, the expansion is more in the content than in the actual footprint of our building.
Yeah, tell us about some of those shows and podcasts you're currently working on that people should check out.
Sure. Well, we have a lot of great shows right now. K-pop Dreaming is when I think the latest release from our studios. It's the story of K-pop, its emergence, and really how LA played a role in that, in the development of that culture, that genre. It's told through the eyes of a young Korean American woman who grew up in Koreatown. It's fantastic. I really recommend that. We also have an ongoing, it's 3 days a week. It's called How to LA, and it's very focused locally on, I wouldn't say it's the main headlines of the day. It's more of a show that kind of helps you discover new places and connects you with people doing new things and takes you to parts of the city you may not have been to before. That's hosted by Brian De Los Santos, and it's 3 days a week. That's also one we're very excited and proud of. And then we have a show called Wild, which is a little outside of the journalism. It's more of an entertainment show. It's about falling in love and what that means during post-COVID times. And that comes out, I believe, next month.
Cool. Well, great. And I'll give a shameless plug to a podcast I was recently involved in, the Blood, Sweat, and Rockets podcast series about early JPL history and Jack Parsons and Frank Molina. And I had written a series about Jack Parsons and Frank Molina last year for Pasadena Now. And so they contacted me, interviewed me for the show. It's a really interesting story. So I encourage people to check that out. Check out all these other shows. And Kristen, thank you so much for coming on this show. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. And thank you for being part of that podcast. I'm so sorry I didn't mention it at the top. It's a terrific listen. I mean, especially for Pasadenans and people who don't understand the influence that JPL has had, not just locally and within the space industry, but internationally. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a crazy story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kristen. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Justin.
All right, take care. Before we go, here is this month in Pasadena history. It was this month in 2020, not that long ago, and yet it feels like a whole different world a lifetime ago, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. 3 years. As the public health emergency comes to an end, let's take this moment to remember those our community has lost and the lives that have been impacted, to reflect on how our society and our personal lives have changed in that time, on the lessons learned, to remember how things used to be and how we want them to be going forward. What was doesn't have to be what is or what will be. Let's pay forward those lessons learned in our daily lives and interactions with our fellow human beings and take care of each other. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of Pasadena Monthly. Tune in every fourth Friday of the month at 5 p.m. Learn more at pasadenamedia.org and justindouglaschapman.com. Drop me a line at jchapman@cityofpasadena.net. See you next time.